below the top of the sulfur 3p band. With 30 years of experience and expertise on oxides, Professor John Goodenough Group at Oxford started working on oxides because the oxide 2p band lies at a much lower energy than the sulfur 3p band, so you can get 4 volt. So that's how all the oxide cathodes started. So when you go from sulfide to oxide, yes, you can increase the voltage from say approximately 2 volt to 4 volt. Now when you go from a simple oxide like Fe2O3 to a polyanion oxide such as iron sulfate or phosphate or even silicates, you can increase the voltage even further in an oxide, because in these examples, for example, the FeO6 octahedra share corners with the XO4 tetrahedra, that is sulfate or molybdate or phosphate. So that means the oxygen is competing with both iron on one side and the X on the other side. So if the sulfur oxygen bond is very covalent, the iron oxygen bond will be less covalent or more ionic. Therefore, the iron redox energy will not be raised that much compared to in a simple oxide. So you increase the voltage. In these examples, for example, you go from 3 volt to 3.6 volt from molybdate to sulfate. And in fact, you go from less than 2.5 volt to 3.6 volt when you go from iron oxide to iron sulfate. So this is yet another way of increasing the voltage when you go from a simple oxide to a polyanion oxide. So there are now 3 major classes of oxide cathodes: layered, spinel, and polyanion family of oxides. And all the 3 of them were developed by Professor Goodenough Group, started at Oxford, and then also carried out at least the 3rd part at the University of Texas at Austin. And each one of them have their advantages and disadvantages. I have listed some of them here, but I will point out the major advantages. The layered oxides have high electronic and ionic conductivity. They are also highly dense, so we can get much higher energy density with the layered oxides compared to the others. But there are limitations. With cobalt, you cannot charge more than 50%. With nickel, there are cyclability issues. With manganese, stability issues. With spinels, again, we get reasonably good electronic and ionic conductivity. They have good structural stability, but there are limitations on the cyclability. Polyanion, the main advantage is the oxygen is very strongly bound by phosphorus or sulfur or others, so you get good thermal stability. There are also a wide range of materials with polyanion family. You can use very low cost metal ions like iron, for example. So those are all the advantages. The disadvantages are poor electronic and ionic conductivity, so you have to make them nano, coat them with carbon. So at the end of the day, you get very low volumetric energy density. So these were the 3 families or concepts developed in the 1980s involving 3 visiting scientists, and none of them had overlap. Very interesting story. Mishima from Japan came, worked on layered oxides with John Goodenough, left. Then Michael Thackeray came from South Africa, worked on spinel, went back to South Africa. I came from India, started the polyanion. Then I was the one happened to stay, come to UT Austin with Goodenough from Oxford. And for the past 35 years, I have the privilege of seeing John almost every day. So I would say the 3 of us were very lucky to work with John in the 1980s to contribute to the oxide cathodes. So now today I'm going to focus on mainly the layered oxide cathodes. So the first question is, Why do we have 3 metal ions, NMC, rather than 1 metal ion for the cathode? The answer is each one of them has its own advantages and disadvantages. There are 2 major aspects. The first aspect is the relative position of these redox couples with respect to the top of the oxygen 2p band. Cobalt 3 plus 4 plus overlaps with the top of the oxygen 2p band, so it has chemical instability. For example, my group used to do a lot of chemical delithiation 20 years back. So if you keep on removing lithium from lithium cobalt oxide, the oxidation state does not increase below 0.5 lithium because you are not oxidizing cobalt anymore, you are losing oxygen. In contrast, you can go all the way to 4 plus with manganese and nickel. The other factor is the stability of these ions in the octahedral site versus tetrahedral site. So if you take the difference, that will be termed as octahedral site stabilization energy. As you see here, with the 6 electrons in the low-lying T2G band, cobalt 3 plus loves octahedral site, it hates tetrahedral site. On the other hand, manganese has very low stabilization. It can move very easily from the transition metal layer through a neighboring tetrahedral site to the octahedral site in the lithium layer, transitioning from layer to spinel-like phases, voltage fade, all those which we do not have with cobalt. So cobalt is a gift. There are a few other criteria. Cobalt is metallic, others are not. Manganese is abundant and environmentally benign, and manganese dissolves more. Cobalt doesn't dissolve that much when you discharge. If you look at it, in all of these 6 criteria, nickel is in between manganese and cobalt. The important thing to note is chemical and structural stability, manganese and cobalt are exactly diametrically opposite. That's too bad, but that's what we have, and we have to live with that. That's why we have a combination of NMC. Now, nickel can go all the way to 4 plus, so we can get much higher capacity with nickel than cobalt. Also, fortunately, when we synthesize compounds with high nickel content, we get high tap density. That's good for high volumetric energy density. Even though nickel does not become metallic because we are operating with EG band rather than T2G band, it is still highly covalent, so you can get good rate capability. In the battery, about 50% of the material cost is from cathode, and in the cathode, cobalt is the most expensive, and cobalt also has less supply compared to nickel. So there is a lot of interest to get rid of cobalt and increase nickel, so that can also lower the cost. But there are challenges, 3 challenges. When you increase nickel, cycle instability, thermal instability, air instability, that involves both the bulk and surface of the cathode as well as the interaction of the cathode with the electrolyte, and species dissolving, interacting with the anode. So it's a complex problem, and that's what my talk is going to focus. So all the samples I'm going to present data were made by co-precipitation of the hydroxides and firing with lithium hydroxide. We can actually make any composition 10 kilogram of hydroxide precursor per batch. Nickel content anywhere from 0 to 100%. We can also incorporate hard to incorporate or dope ions like manganese and aluminum during the co-precipitation. So all the data I'm going to show you, they have secondary particles of 10 to 12 micron and primary particles. One secondary particle is shown here, so you can see how the primary particles are sticking together. And they also get good, nice crystalline phases. I am also going to present all the data with pouch cell, with graphite anode, not with half cell lithium metal anode, so very reliable. So here I am comparing two cathodes, NMC 811, 80% nickel, and NC, no manganese, with 94% nickel. You can see the cyclability here. First, when you go from 80% nickel to 94%, you get higher capacity. That's why we are all interested to increase the nickel content. But the cyclability is getting worse when we go from 80% nickel to 94% nickel. If you look at the cycle life, if you really look at large number of cycles, like 1500 cycles, then the 9406 fares much more compared to 811. So now we need to understand why. Of course, we keep the cutoff voltage 4.3. As you increase in nickel content, the voltage slightly decreases. So with the same cutoff voltage, you can get higher capacity with a higher nickel content compared to with a lower nickel content. That means when you charge it, you get lattice parameter changes in the C parameter. So that creates cracks. When you create cracks, you also create new surfaces. So interaction of the cathode surface with the electrolyte is keep on continuously increasing as we cycle. So this shows a comparison of an SEM evaluation or inspection of the two cathodes after 1500 cycles. So as you see here, initially you don't see much difference, but if you take the cathode out after 1500 cycles, there is much more cracking, degradation in the 9406 material compared to the 80% material. So more pulverization, more surface reactivity. So that's just the bulk. We have also used time of flight secondary ion mass spectrometry. That has the unique advantage of producing characteristic lithium bearing ion fragments depending upon which compound you have. So that can help us to have a better understanding of the interfacial reaction between the electrolyte and cathode. One important aspect is, supposing if you have metallic lithium on graphite, you will get a lot of Li3 clusters compared to other compounds. So that's a way we can detect whether metallic lithium is deposited on graphite or other components. In addition to that, you can sputter, and we can see as you keep on sputtering how the components are changing, and you can also use isotope enriched cathode, and you can understand the cathode electrolyte interaction. This slide is important. So we are comparing the SEI thickness on the graphite. So the only difference is, in one case 811 cathode, another case 9406 cathode. Everything else is same. So we are now, by sputtering, see how much depth we have to go to see the graphite as a function of cycle number. 811, after 1500 cycle, you have to sputter this much to see the graphite. 9406, you have to sputter that much to see the graphite. The scale bar is here, so you can kind of compare. So that means the graphite has much thicker SEI layer when it is paired with 9406 compared to 811. Only the cathode is different. Anode is same. Everything else is same. Also, the amount of nickel deposited on the graphite after 1500 cycle is much more when the graphite is paired with 9406 compared to when it is paired with 811. So metal dissolution increases with increasing nickel content, and metal deposition on the anode because of crossover also increases with increasing nickel content. Safety or thermal. So to compare the thermal stability, we have to charge them to the same capacity, otherwise it will not be a good comparison. So this is after charging to 220 milliamp hour per gram. As you see here, when the nickel content increases, the thermal stability decreases. That is understandable. Manganese has all kinds of oxides, 2+, 3+, 4+ oxide. Cobalt has only 2+ and 3+ oxide, no 4+. Nickel has only 2+ oxide, not even Ni2O3. Therefore, nickel is much more unstable in contact with the electrolyte. So that's why the stability is decreased. In addition to that, the biggest headache at the industry with high nickel compounds is lithium comes out to the surface when you keep the material at ambient condition in air to form lithium hydroxide or lithium bicarbonate or lithium carbonate, as you see here, these little green things. So that's called residual lithium. If you have too much of it, it creates problem, clogging to make electrode. It also degrades the performance. So residual lithium increases exponentially with increasing nickel content. Exponential. When you go from 60 to 80, already problem, 80 to 90, much more problem, 90 to 95, even more, 95 to 100%, much more. So it is exponential, as you see here in this plot. So what do we do? Are we stuck or can we do something? Yes, of course we can do something. So we are comparing here the same 9406 without any aluminum and here with 2% aluminum. You can see as soon as you put aluminum, you get much better cyclability, the red curves. You also get much better voltage stability. Why? If you do not have much aluminum or do not have any aluminum, you have more nickel crossover to the graphite compared to the sample which has 2% aluminum. And that also lead to more trapping of active lithium on the anode compared to the material that has 2% aluminum. So aluminum, magnesium, and even boron or other dopant do lot of magic to have a big difference in this. I'm comparing here the cyclability again, undoped versus aluminum and magnesium. Again, you can see doped samples have better cyclability. And doped samples also have better thermal stability compared to the undoped. I'm also comparing the performance after exposing the undoped material to air. As you see here, the undoped material after exposing to air for 14 days or 30 days degrades much compared to the material with 2% aluminum, less degradation. So what is the magic with aluminum or magnesium or other dopants? Of course, there are small differences in the energy level among manganese, cobalt, and nickel, but they have edge-shade octahedra. So the metal ions are directly seeing each other. So there is a good flow of electron, I would say highly delocalized system. Electron mobility is good. As soon as you put aluminum, you perturb that electron delocalization or communication. The lattice becomes a little bit more localized, the so-called Anderson localization, physics community. So because it becomes robust, the metal-oxygen bond becomes stronger, and also mobility and electron mobility is decreased, therefore metal dissolution is decreased. I think it went too far. Hold on one second. Okay. So far I talked about doping, bulk stabilization. We have now surface stabilization by treating these oxides with oxygen 18 enriched phosphoric acid. The phosphoric acid amount is less than 1 mole%, very little. So when you do that, that reacts with the residual lithium and forms a nice Li3PO4 layer on the surface. You can see from Topsim's image. And the big difference you see is the cyclability. There is a big difference. The sample PNC means phosphoric acid treated, NC means not treated. You can see much better cyclability when you treat the sample with phosphoric acid because the surface is covered with a nice lithium ion conducting Li3PO4. We have also examined the samples. After 1000 cycle, the rock salt formation is to a depth of 15 nanometer in the NC sample compared to 3 nanometer in the case of phosphoric acid treated sample. So degradation on the surface is decreased. This is the cathode electrolyte interfacial layer analysis with top sims. As you see, there is much thicker CI on the sample which was not treated with phosphoric acid, much thinner, 20 nanometer versus 100 nanometer on the sample treated with phosphoric acid. We have also charged the two samples to 4.4 volt and stored at 55 degrees C to see how the things change. The sample treated with phosphoric acid has much more stability on the voltage when you store at 55. And also after storing at 55, if you look at the discharge capacity, the phosphoric acid treated sample has higher discharge capacity than the other sample. So surface stabilization is important. This is the anode, examination of the anode, graphite anode paired with the NC and the phosphoric acid treated sample. It's very hard to go through everything. Particularly, I would like to pay attention to the nickel. As you see here, the sample not treated with phosphoric acid has much more quantity of nickel on the graphite anode compared to the sample which was treated with phosphoric acid. So the sample treated with phosphoric acid has a nice surface protection. So that means metal dissolution decreased. That means you see less amount of nickel on the graphite anode. And also you see much thinner SEA layer on the phosphoric acid treated sample, 10 nanometer compared to 40 nanometer thick on the untreated sample. Now the next question is, yes, metal dissolution is a headache. Why do they dissolve? How do they dissolve? Would all the metal ions dissolve? The answer is no. So it is an electronically driven lattice instability that leads to the dissolution. Particularly metal ions which have one electron in the EG band, they are Jahn-Teller active, they can have long range distortion or dynamic fluctuation, Jahn-Teller distortion. If you have that, then few things can happen. The Mn3 plus ions can do charge ordering to relieve the instability. So one can become 2 plus, one can become 4 plus. Once it becomes like that, the trace amount of proton present in the material can protonate the oxide and water can be formed and that can go away. When the water goes away along with manganese, so that's how the manganese 2 plus goes into solution, and then the dissolved manganese goes to the anode and causes all these problems. So only certain ions which have electronic instability due to one electron in the EG band, that causes dynamic or static lattice instability, and they lead to manganese dissolution. So far, I talked mainly about the cathode stabilization, both bulk and surface, but we have to also work with electrolyte. So for example, I show something here, some electrolyte having EC, this does not have EC, and we also change salt. So when you do not have any ethylene carbonate in the electrolyte, that gives better cyclability both at 25 degrees C as well as at 45 degrees C. It also gives better storage stability, the EC free. Not only that, when you remove EC, you also get better thermal stability. So conclusion, we cannot simply work with the cathode alone. We need to work both the cathode bulk, surface, as well as the electrolyte to have a good performance. So ultimate goal is to eliminate completely cobalt. So we have been successful to completely remove cobalt with a 90% nickel, 5% manganese, 5% aluminum. That just came out in Advanced Materials last week. So we are comparing a series of compounds here. Only NMA here does not have any cobalt. Others have a little bit of 5% cobalt. You can see the NMA cycles well compared to same as 622, but 622 has lower capacity. It cycles better than some of the cobalt containing composition. Usually people will be worried about rate capability. We do not see any compromise on the rate capability when we completely eliminate the cobalt, and also safety. We do not see any compromise. Actually, in fact, the thermal stability is better compared to some of the cobalt containing compositions. So the answer, cobalt can be completely eliminated from these layered oxides as we move forward. Now a couple of slides. So far I talked about lithium layered oxides. There is a lot of work going on with sodium layered oxides. We will have a lot of similar problems as we have with lithium layered oxides. On top of it, we may also have additional complication because sodium prefers both octahedral and tetrahedral, trigonal prismatic coordinations. Therefore, they can very easily slide the layers. So you can get O3 to P means sodium is in the prismatic, O means sodium is in the octahedral. So those kind of transitions can happen, which is to a lesser extent in the case of lithium. Multivalent ion, again, oxides are useful, but close-packed oxides, if we take, multivalent ion diffusion is a big problem. Sometimes in my group, we do simple chemistry experiments to learn a lot. For example, if you have LiMn2O4, treat with the NO2BF4, you can remove all the lithium out, no problem. If you have same structure, everything same, you have MgMn2O4, treat with the NO2BF4, no magnesium can be removed. X-ray pattern you can see here, you can analyze magnesium content, nothing happens. Why? Magnesium 2+ has a hard time to move from the tetrahedral side to a neighboring empty 16C octahedral side to the next tetrahedral side, so it doesn't want to move. So in close-packed structures, diffusion will be a problem. Also, in these materials, if you have trace amount of water, proton may be inserting in these materials rather than multivalent ion. So one needs to be careful to employ a series of different characterization techniques to have a good understanding of whether it is really proton or multivalent ion. If you go to more covalent systems like sulfide, then you can have better possibility, you can, but then the voltage will decrease. Finally, conclusion, nickel is the only candidate that can eliminate cobalt without sacrificing the capacity or energy density, but they have cycle, thermal, and air instabilities that increase exponentially with increasing nickel content. Capacity fade is due to both cracking as well as surface reaction, and dissolved metal ions go to the anode and cause problem. Doping helps, surface coating also helps. Again, compatible electrolytes will also help. When you go to sodium analogs, similar problems can be there. Lot needs to be understood with sodium, metal dissolution, long-term cyclability, multivalent ion, diffusion and limitations, proton versus multivalent ion insertion we need to worry about. And finally, I would like to thank all the people who have worked with me, more than 250 people over the years. They are spread all over the world. I am very, very grateful to all of them, as well as funding agencies, particularly Department of Energy, VTO, and BES, and other agencies for funding our work. Thank you very much.